Gotham City, one of the most crime-ridden cities in America, combining the worst elements of every known cesspool to create the most depraved location known to man. The city is like a factory, cooking up the worst human beings known to the world. Chaos has essentially become a part of everyday life. Getting mugged has become a common occurrence, despite the fact that everyone is too poor to have money to spare.
Look at here, $22. Not bad. Not bad. That's 2 weeks' pay, man.
Gotham is a city that'll forever be tainted by crime, and it makes me wonder sometimes, why do people still live there to begin with? If you were forced to live in a version of Gotham City for a month, which live-action version would offer you the highest survival rate? For this video, we'll be using a 4-star rating system to determine the safety of Gotham. 1 star represents an incredibly safe city, and 4 stars represents a city you should avoid at all costs. The ratings depend on the aesthetic of Gotham, its crime rate, and how Batman is portrayed, as he often acts as a metric for the city's danger. Anyways, let's get started. The first on-screen depiction of Gotham appears in both the Batman TV series and the movie serials. Since these projects were quite low budget, Gotham is not a sprawling metropolis, but a soundstage with limited variations in sets. As a result, Gotham has no sense of style. It feels too real-world and familiar, which really takes away from the fantasy of Gotham City. In terms of actual crime, both versions portray Gotham as a relatively safe place to live in. Sure, both cities are terrorized by fantastical or superpowered individuals, but their antics don't often lead to bodily harm or extreme amounts of collateral damage, as most crimes are petty crimes, such as stealing jewels or stealing money. Batman's presence never feels justified, as the cops could easily deal with the threats themselves if they were competent. Batman in both projects is portrayed as polite and having a strong sense of justice. They never seem to be outright obsessed with their mission and voluntarily fight crime for the good of the people. Adam West's Batman comes across as a comically moral, law-abiding citizen, and Gotham perfectly mirrors his persona. The city is never shown to be a cesspool. It looks quite well funded, and the citizens are portrayed to be healthy, educated, and generally nice people. The same can't be said for the TV serials. Although Batman is portrayed as a stoic individual, he has one glaring issue.
Jack!
He's racist. The original Batman serials came out during the height of World War II, so they were essentially anti-Japanese propaganda. This portrays Gotham City as a place, while not incredibly violent, is in the midst of a major racial divide.
This was part of a foreign land transplanted bodily to America and known as Little Tokyo. Since a wise government rounded up the shifty-eyed Japs, it has become virtually a ghost street.
In terms of overall danger, West Gotham scores a half-star on the city danger level, while the serials score a complete star due to quality of life issues for certain racial groups.
Decent people shouldn't live here. They'd be happier someplace else.
Hell burst through the pavement and grew. Those were the words that were used to describe Tim Burton's Gotham City, and although it serves as a fantastic description of the location, it doesn't fully encompass the city's vile roots. Burton's Gotham is both hideous, but also beautiful at the same time. It's a Gothic dystopia of imposing architectural styles and towering Gothic structures. It makes the city appear as if it's trapped in time, a Gothic labyrinth many can never escape. The city is filled with tightly packed streets and dimly lit alleyways, all encompassed by perpetual smoke and darkness that envelops everything, with towering skyscrapers threatening to trap the civilians within a prison of concrete structures. The touch of Art Deco, neon lights, and retro-futuristic design helps alleviate the anxiety and adds to the otherworldliness of Gotham City. In our first introduction to Gotham, we are already exposed to the city's depravity. Police sirens are heard all throughout. The civilians are rude. Trash fills the streets. There's an abundance of homeless. It feels incredibly claustrophobic. And there's public prostitutes that have no problem going after minors.
Hi, honey.
Hey, how are you? Could you do me a favor and have a seat right over there on that stool, please? Yeah.
Crime wouldn't be so rampant if the police had a shred of competence. However, many of them are under the payroll of multiple mob families who've had influence over Gotham for decades. Burton's Gotham seems to attract the strange and fantastical, and has a knack for bringing out the insanity within certain individuals, and it can morph and change even good people to a fundamental level. Gotham is home to the strange, corrupt, and evil. So it's no wonder that this world's Batman is a perfect escalation of the city's corruption. Batman is portrayed as a cold and calculating force of nature. He lacks clear empathy, as he enjoys murdering criminals with no hesitation. He's also not very talkative, a sign of his emotional distance from the world. Gotham is a gothic nightmare that attracts the strange, corrupt, and the macabre. Individuals here are either born evil or are influenced by the city's corrupting nature. According to Anton First, Gotham was not a once great city affected by crime, but a city formed from extortion and crime itself. Burton's Gotham receives full stars on the city danger level.
It's so bright and chipper and conservative.
Joel Schumacher took the retro-futuristic elements of Tim Burton's Gotham and heightened it to a dystopian metropolis. Gotham looks like a massive sprawling theme park made to resemble a city. The unique grand architecture, the neon lights that cut through the night, and the gigantic Greek statues implies that Gotham is very proud of its history. The artists and production designers constructed a sprawling mythic metropolis that was vibrant and full of youthful energy. It's almost as if the residents are stuck within a perpetual nightclub that they can't escape. A city this extravagant and wealthy would of course attract very unique crowds with eccentric and over-the-top personalities, especially criminals and costume supervillains. Gotham City is most likely rampant with petty crime, assault, theft, illegal street racing, and harassment. But Gotham isn't only inhabited by just petty criminals, but also superpowered and over-the-top villains. The villains in Schumacher's world mostly engage in theatrical and over-the-top antics for their own personal gain. Their actions usually result in severe collateral damage for those unlucky enough to be around them. Some deaths are even purposeful, as the villains have no regard for the life of others. A city that attracts so many wild characters would need a version of Batman who could effortlessly deal with them. A person who is the embodiment of absolute justice, but still perfectly fits into this vibrant world. Joel Schumacher's Batman is an idealized, polite, and stoic individual, a personification of heroic morals, who has the right resources, skills, and tools to effortlessly deal with any situation. He's a man who keeps the peace and makes sure that zany criminals don't overrun the city with chaos. Gotham City is an exaggerated tourist attraction that has an abundance of wealth and resources, but because of this, it can attract some rowdy and dangerous crowds, and it sometimes can get a bit too intense. If you lived here, you are bound to get caught up eventually in the city's antics. Schumacher's Gotham scores a 2.5 on the city danger level.
This city is rotting. They talk about the Depression as if it's history, and it's not. Things are worse than ever down here.
Although Batman Begins was envisioned as a film set within a more grounded world, Nolan still embraced some fantastical elements of Batman's mythos. This is especially true for Gotham City, which mixes real-world locations, massively built sets, computer-generated imagery, and detailed miniatures to craft a believable city that could reasonably exist in our world. Gotham in Batman Begins is a caricature of cities like Chicago, New York, and Hong Kong. It combines elements of these iconic cities and creates an urban metropolis of shining steel, glass, and concrete, all interconnected through a citywide train and a series of rivers. With Wayne Tower at the center of this beautiful city, it's clear that Gotham is at the height of its prosperity, with the Wayne family being the progenitors behind its wealthy resurgence from economic decay. However, after their deaths, Gotham's foundation begins to crumble, allowing for crime to overtake this once great city. This once prosperous utopia, bathed in sunlight, has now been overtaken by a disgusting yellow and brown color scheme, representing the city's slow decay from the inside. Corruption has now transformed Gotham into an unkept hellhole of urban filth. Underneath the decaying structures reveals the true Gotham that the elite have desperately attempted to conceal. A vast island of slums being eaten away by rot, concealed by perpetual smog, created by the terrible living conditions. The Narrows are inhabited by the forgotten and poor residents of Gotham that have been thrown away, a group Gotham considered so filthy and poor that they designated an entire island to keep them away from the general populace. If weren't for the dimly lit neon lights breaching through the smoke, these forsaken residents would risk being forgotten about forever. The Narrows represents the effects corruption and excess has on a once great city. Its tight claustrophobic streets, abundance of trash, and its derelict buildings are the least of your worries, as it's also a hub for drug trafficking and excessive amounts of crime. With trusted mental institutions like Arkham Asylum being run by individuals crazier than the patients, it's become clear that the city is a major shadow of its former self. This is a city that was so vile that it warranted 4 major responses to its corruption. The first was the League of Shadows, an organization who have destroyed the city in the past and attempted to do so once again, but this time for good. The second is the Joker, a man who strived for needless chaos and single-handedly almost turned the entire city against itself. And last but not least was Bane, a force of revolution who attempted to wipe Gotham off the face of the earth. This is a city that was devoid of hope and needed a symbol that would allow it to rise once again from the ashes. Batman served as that symbol of hope for the people of Gotham. His presence alone was enough to significantly decrease the city's crime rate, driving the mob into hiding and forcing them into a state of desperation. Because of Batman's presence, Gotham sees a new resurgence. The city also sees an emergence of new protectors, ones that couldn't have rose up without Batman's presence. Gotham was in a state of decay in the past because its citizens lost all hope. The Wayne family had been their anchor, and without them, they sunk into depravity. However, because of Batman's hopeful mission to become a symbol of hope for the damned, Gotham has now become rejuvenated and ready to rebuild its crumbling foundations. This hints that Gotham wasn't truly evil, but suffering from great misfortune. All it needed was the right kind of help to pick itself back up. The safety of Nolan's Gotham depends greatly on the time period. Did you live here during its prosperous era, its catastrophic recession into corruption, or its slow and shaky escalation back to normal?
Years in Gotham, Alfred. We've seen what promises are worth. How many good guys are left? How many stayed that way?
Now we've gotten to the DCEU's iteration of Gotham. Although we barely know anything about this version, there are enough clues to get a basic idea of its structure. Gotham from the outside looks like a wealthy city lit up by neon lights. One that offers extravagant nightclubs, prestigious entertainment, and lively city corners. However, that's only a mask, meant to hide its more seedy underbelly, containing heinous things such as human trafficking. With an eroding city like this, it's no wonder that active crime organizations owned by Black Mask and even the Joker exist and continue to thrive despite the presence of a more ruthless Batman. A Batman who no longer has any sort of issue brutally murdering criminals or sending them to their deaths with his branding. Batman got this way because of Gotham's corrupting nature. It's the ability to slowly corrupt the best of people over a long period of time. Friends and allies you may make don't seem to matter in the grand scheme of things, because Gotham has a way of making them turn their backs on you or become a victim of its corruption. Batfleck's Gotham may not have much information due to a lack of screen time, but its criminal organizations and corrupting aura paints a picture of a city that harms one in both physical and psychological ways. Gotham City receives a 3 on the city danger level.
Gotham's lost its way. And until those kind of people change for the better, those of us who have made something of our lives will always look at those who haven't as nothing but clowns.
Gotham is often portrayed to be a poor city in the midst of economic decline. This is the type of Gotham that's portrayed in the film Joker, a city that's been stricken by economic and societal decay. Throughout the film, it's made clear just how poor Gotham has become because of a citywide strike by the garbage disposal companies. The city's garbage has begun to accumulate. Mountains of trash fills the streets and emits a foul odor that's not only horrid to be around, but also attracts dozens of rats. With graffiti sprawled across nearly every wall, it just makes Gotham appear unsightly and disgusting. Because of Gotham's inability to bring about change and the elite's boundless greed, basic but important social services have been defunded, leaving those who need it to be left behind. This Gotham is suffering from a rising class tension. While the rich enjoy their luxurious lives, the less fortunate are left to suffer without any help. This is a Gotham that's been abandoned by the only ones that can help. A city that is rotting away at its foundation and is at risk of total collapse. With tensions between the rich and poor rising, Gotham has quickly turned into a powder keg, ready to explode into violence and chaos. With all this taken into account, Joker's Gotham receives a score of 2.5.
Murder, robberies, assault. 2 years later, they're all up. And now this. The city's eating itself. Maybe it's beyond saving.
Imagine a city that went through a crime wave similar to what occurred in 1970s New York. A city run by the mob, crooked police officers, corrupt politicians, and violent gangs. Now imagine that the city never got out of that crime wave and instead got worse With each passing year, Matt Reeves crafted a Gotham City that is cursed by rising crime rates, with no hope of escaping its violent escalation. Gotham City is a city of negligence, trapped within a far-gone era. When Thomas Wayne was still alive, he created the Renewal Program, a citywide program meant to improve Gotham City's infrastructure and help develop its lesser-income locations. However, after their deaths, the Renewal Program essentially came to a standstill, with many building projects being abandoned due to a lack of funding. Due to this, Gotham appears developmentally stunted. Throughout the film, we are reminded of the failures of the Renewal Program through how dirty Gotham appears. The city is falling apart. It's very clearly past its prime and is now slowly regressing into a place of apathy. Judging from the infrastructure, Gotham appears to be decades old. This was a city born from wealth. Its Gothic structures dominate the skyline, showcasing the ambitions and accomplishments of its architects. The interiors look old money, Victorian, and quite refined, revealing the luxurious lifestyles and mindsets of its more affluent citizens. But this city is long past its wealthy origins. With crime corrupting the city's leadership, the city has failed to change with the times. Gothic structures may have showcased the city's wealth in the past, but now it portrays Gotham as a place that's failed to develop and move on from its past. Instead of renewing outdated infrastructure, new technologies seem to be built over existing ones. Large bright billboards and neon signs are tightly littered across the buildings, forcibly attempting to cover up the ancient buildings underneath. The city is attempting to hide their past, ashamed of how far it's fallen from grace. Even the more modern structures and technologies appear outdated and overtaken by rust. The signs of neglect reflected by the flickering neon lights and the stained concrete and decorations. This is a city that attempted to industrialize and modernize its Gothic structures. However, due to a lack of funding, the city became perpetually trapped in development, unable to improve and move on from its past. The city combines old money European architecture and design influences and combines it with an industrialized American aesthetic to create a strange, retro-modern dystopia rooted in Gothic influences, one that's been forgotten by Gotham's elite and has long passed its days of affluence. With the city being cursed by a never-ending downpour of rain, despair seems to have overtaken everyday life. With Gotham in such a state of despair, many individuals will of course try to take advantage of others to benefit themselves and their desires. Street gangs roam around destroying property and even attacking innocent civilians for no reason other than entertainment. Drugs run rampant across the city, creating an epidemic that cannot be contained. The mob is very much at the height of their influence. They pay off the cops and politicians, who allow them to sink the city even more into depravity. Gotham has become so corrupt and twisted that it spawned one of the most nihilistic versions of Batman, a violent vigilante born from chaos. He aimlessly roams the streets, looking for his next victim, where he proceeds to brutally beat them to unconsciousness. Batman is a hopeless creature of the night, a man who has no ambitions and no understanding of those less fortunate. He's lost in his own despair and only seeks to enforce his brand of brutal justice. With Gotham's crime rate increasing every year, it only adds to his nihilistic black and white worldview and slowly pushes him over the edge. Gotham is a city that was once prosperous and full of hope. However, the city began to regress into urban filth, allowing crime and violence to rot and overtake it. With all these facts taken into account, Matt Reeves' Gotham scores a 3.5 on the city danger level.